Let's talk about the Pygmalion effect. One of the most powerful psychological discoveries in the last century, and yet the one who discovered it still says to this day he is disappointed as to how many people use it. And it all started with a bunch of rats. It was 1963 and Bob Rosenthal was working at Harvard, and he was doing some studies, some psychological studies, working with rats and students working with the rats. So he had two bunches of rats, and on each cage there was a little sign. And in the one sign he wrote, just one morning, he wrote, "Specially trained, intelligent rats," even though they were the same rats as in the other cage. And on the other cage he wrote, "Slow, dumb rats." And consequently, he had students go in, work with the rats, and lead the rats through a maze. And what happened was astounding. So astounding that he couldn't get it published anywhere. So Bob Rosenthal couldn't get the results of this study published anywhere because nobody believed them. So what happened? The students that were working with the rats that were intelligent and specially trained, which they weren't, were leading the rats through the maze, and these rats actually did better than the rats that were labeled as dumb and slow, even though they were the same rats. How can that be? Of course, first he checked if they were really doing better or if it just was the, interpretation of the students working with the rats. But it wasn't. They were actually performing better. Bob Rosenthal thought about this long and hard to find an explanation why rats who cannot communicate, who didn't even know there was something written on their cage at all, who can't read, how could they perform better than the rats that were labeled dumb and slow? In the end, he got it. He figured it out. And what he discovered was that when the students working with the rats were expecting an intelligent, specially trained rat, they would treat them a little bit differently than they would treat the rats that were labeled as dumb and slow. So he thought for himself, probably the way the students touch and work with the intelligent labeled rat is just a bit nicer, just a bit better, and their expectations of how the rat will do are transferred into the rat by the way they treat them, and that will cause the rat to actually do better at the task. So Bob Rosenthal couldn't get the results of the study published, but he did write an article about it, and this article was read by Eleanor Jacobson. She was a principal of a school in San Francisco, and she contacted him and she said, "We need to do something with this because maybe my teachers have certain beliefs and expectations of certain students and maybe they're influencing them." So they went to work. Rosenthal and Jacobson told all the teachers that they would do a special IQ test on all the students and that they would let them know which students were expected to be super good and growing that year. They weren't going to label them negatively, but just the positive ones. So they did, all the IQ tests, all the students did them. They put away the results. They didn't even look at them. But they didn't tell this to the teachers. And then they flipped a coin, and they decided by flipping the coin which 20% of the students were expected to have great results that year. And this they told the teachers. So now the teachers go in with a great expectation of 20% of their students. By the end of the year, the students were given the same IQ test to see what had happened. And specifically in the younger students, they grew 27 points on their IQ test if they had been labeled that they would do positively that year. 27 points? 27 IQ points? Yes. So what does this mean? Let's look at the model that's behind this. So it all starts with your belief, the belief that you or your supervisor or your teacher has about you, your belief. If the belief is they're going to do positive, then that's going to influence your behavior. You're going to, treat them a little bit differently when they ask a stupid question. You're going to respond to that differently than when you have expectations that they're going to be stupid anyway, or dumb, lazy rats. Now, that behavior is going to influence the way the person sees themselves. So the other person, if you treat them like, I have high expectations of you, I think you're going to be great, they're going to think of themselves as, probably I am great. So we influence their opinion about themselves. And when their belief about themselves changes, their behavior is going to change. They're going to show more promise, they're going to be more optimistic about themselves, they're maybe going to ask more questions, and that then is going to influence your belief that you have about that person again. And you're going to be confirmed, I already thought they were great, and look at that, they're actually great. Please look at this in two ways. The one way is where you have the belief about the other person and you influence the way they think about themselves, but also look at it from the perspective that people have opinions and beliefs about you. If you look back at your school time, probably there were people who had certain beliefs about you and you started fulfilling their beliefs. So this is not a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is another person's fulfilling prophecy. Once you start to believe it, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But before that, there's another person who has a certain belief about you, and you start to live up to that expectation. Pretty nice. Now, what does this mean? This means that if I am a teacher or a leader or a trainer or somebody, a supervisor, and I'm working with people, my beliefs about their abilities will come true. Let me say that again. My beliefs influence the amount of, performance I will get from those people. That means that me taking responsibility for the belief I have about them is super important, because the Pygmalion effect has an ugly, nasty, evil little brother. And it's called the Gollem effect. The Gollem effect is the exact opposite from the Pygmalion effect. Because if my belief is that somebody is gonna do badly, I'm gonna show that in my behavior. Thus, I will influence them in thinking they're probably gonna do badly. They're gonna behave accordingly, and they're gonna show me that I was right. So the Pygmalion effect is when I have high expectations of somebody and they will live up to it. But the Gollem effect will be, I think this is why Tolkien called Gollem. Oh, the precious. So the Gollem effect is in fact the same happening, but now with negative expectations. So the most interesting question now becomes, as a teacher, as a leader, as a supervisor, or as a parent, can I influence my beliefs? And the answer is, yes, you can. A very good question would be, did we do studies to see how the Gollem effect works? And the answer is, of course, once we discovered it, it would be immoral to use it. Who would want to go to children in schools and have low expectations of them, or create those low expectations in them, in the teachers about them? We can't. It would be immoral. But we did discover studies in 1939 where orphans were mistreated and where the Gollem effect was shockingly seen. In 1939, Wendell Johnson was working with some orphans. And what he did was he taught half of them, he told them, you guys, you speak really well, you're very eloquent, you speak well, keep that up. And he told the second group that they would probably have a speech impediment later in life, because he could hear by the way they spoke that they would probably get a stammer or a stutter somewhere in life. Unfortunately, the Gollem effect is real, and many of those orphans for the rest of their life had a speech impediment. So when you have a negative belief about somebody or you start to give up on somebody, your behavior will influence their belief about themselves and they will start to behave accordingly. So the main focus of all of us, parents, teachers, trainers, leaders, supervisors, whatever you are, when you work with other people, make sure you check your belief about them. And one thing that always helps me is the realization about the brain of a human being. Did you know that each human being with a healthy brain has 86 billion neurons? That's a lot of zeros. That's the amount of neurons a normal human being has in their brain. And did you also know that no neuroscientist has ever opened the brain and discovered inside of it something called, ooh, this one's not so good at math. Ooh, this one can't do languages. No, these brain cells are incredible. They can connect to up to 200,000 other brain cells and thus learn things. So, whenever you start to notice for yourself, what's my belief about this person? Which belief about themselves am I creating in them? Am I creating a Pygmalion effect or a Gollem effect? Which one am I doing? You can always go back to, wait, this person has 86 billion brain cells. How dare I think of them as not being able to do something? I might have some proof, but maybe I created that proof by being in a Gollem mindset about them. All right, everybody, keep on learning. Use your brain cells and use the Pygmalion effect. And maybe it's nice to know that the Pygmalion effect was named by Rosenthal after the sculptor who created a great sculpture of a woman. And he created her so beautifully that he actually fell in love with her, thus having an expectation of her to become alive, which, you know, in the story she did because of the gods, you know, it's a great story. And the Gollem effect, of course, we all know Gollem from The Lord of the Ring, the precious. I can't do imitations, but it was actually created after a monster living in Prague, and they invented that monster to keep the city safe, but actually Gollem turned against the city. Keep learning. See you next time.